Tonight on Bridge City News, the federal government teams up with the Ontario government to produce 50 million N95 masks. Our federal health minister raises concerns about the growing number of young Canadians affected with COVID-19. And why one pastor and his family believe God was still present in the midst of tragedy.
Your nation. Your province. Your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News Weekend Edition.
Good evening, I'm Loris Alexander. Thank you for joining us. The federal Liberal and Ontario Progressive Conservative governments teamed up to help the 3M Canada factory in Brockville, Ontario expand so it can produce 50 million medical-grade N95 masks annually beginning in 2021. Both Ontario Premier Doug Ford and Prime Minister Justin Trudeau say the partnership is a crucial part of ensuring Canada is never caught without its own supplies during a pandemic again.
Back in April, I made a promise. As your Premier, I promised the people of Ontario that we would never again be left at the mercy of other countries for this critical PPE. Thousands of companies responded, and today, Ontario is producing PPE for all of Canada. And we all know that the gold standard, the equipment we need to give our nurses and doctors that are directly treating COVID-19 patients include the 3M N95 respirator. This facility will produce N95 masks for Ontario and for all of Canada. And this wouldn't be possible without the Ontario government and the Government of Canada coming together. Prime Minister, I want to thank you and recognize you and the Deputy Prime Minister for your unwavering support during the pandemic.
Right from the start of this crisis, our government has worked closely with the provinces and territories to get Canadians the support they need. Fighting COVID-19 is a Team Canada effort, and since March, we've shipped out millions of pieces of personal protective equipment. We're working around the clock to help our essential workers. At the same time, we've invested in production here at home. Earlier this summer, we announced a contract with General Motors to produce 10 million face masks at their plant in Oshawa, items that are already rolling off the line. Not only does this create good middle-class jobs, it also helps ensure that we have the capacity to make whatever we need here in our own communities.
Federal Health Minister Patty Hajdu says she's worried about the rate of COVID-19 infections in young people. And while she knows they care deeply about the safety of their families and communities, they're also at a stage of their lives where they're more tempted to socialize. Hajdu says the number of deaths related to opioids has increased during the pandemic and that the federal government will focus on ensuring people who use drugs get needed support.
Things that continue to worry me and my health minister colleagues include the increase in infections among younger people. Next week, we will have increased targeted communications to young people from the Government of Canada that will speak directly to youth on media channels where they are more likely to see the message. I know that youth care deeply about their communities and families, but they are also drawn to socialize as part of their stage of life. Supporting young people to socialize less or more safely is difficult, but very important if we want to keep the rate of infection low here in Canada. Lastly, I want to remind Canadians that we remain focused on another significant health crisis. Opioid overdoses have increased significantly since the beginning of the pandemic. A lack of safer supply of opioids, a reduction or change of services, and increased isolation have all conspired to present an increased risk of death for people who use opioids. The solutions are complex, but our government has been ensuring that we double down on supports for people who use drugs so they get the compassionate and non-judgmental support they need to stay healthier. Since 2017, supervised consumption sites located across Canada have received almost 2.2 million visits, reversed nearly 17,400 overdoses without a single death at a site, and made approximately 84,400 referrals to health and social services. And we're going to continue to work with communities to ensure safer supplies of opioids in ways that connect people with support that can increase their mental and physical health. COVID-19 has been hard on all of us, but our government will continue to work with communities and Canadians to ensure that we have the tools, supports, and expertise necessary to get through this together.
Groups of protesters gathered at MLA offices across the province yesterday, demanding the government do more when it comes to school reentry this fall. As BCN's Naveen Day reports, educators and parents say they're uneasy about re-entering under the current plan.
Parents, grandparents, teachers, and concerned citizens gathered outside MLA Nathan Neudorf's constituency this morning to voice their concerns in a province-wide protest against the UCP's back-to-school plan.
We all know that what keeps us safe is small gatherings, capping classroom sizes to 15. We must protect our teachers. There's no funding for PPE. There's no funding to rehire all the educational assistants that have been fired.
He's a 6-year-old. He's not good at keeping his hands to himself. He is not good at staying far away from people. It's just, you can't expect that out of kids his age.
In attendance at the protest was Lethbridge West MLA Shannon Phillips. She says even though she is sending her children to school in the fall, it is not a sign of her approval of the plan.
That does not at all reduce my criticisms of this incompetent education minister, this utter moral abdication of responsibility on the part of Premier Kenney and his cabinet, in particular his finance minister.
Alberta Minister of Education Adriana LaGrange responded to criticism in a written statement. She says it is disappointing voices on social media and in the opposition continue to politicize the decisions made by nonpartisan medical experts. We will continue to work with Dr. Hinshaw and our education system and will adjust our guidelines as necessary. Neither Lethbridge East MLA Nathan Neudorf or his staff were available for comment. For Bridge City News, I'm Naveen Day.
Donald and Donna Bladen received an alert from their alarm company and said they raced home from work to find their house in flames on Tuesday. BCN spoke with the Bladen family on why they still feel God's hand upon their lives.
Very chaotic, very emotional.
That's how Major Donald Bladen describes the last few days. But despite the circumstances, the Salvation Army pastor says he's a man of faith. He believes divine intervention was at play.
I wake up in the morning and, my wife and I get ready and we take Sophie, out for a little bit of a break, and she comes back in and she's a little different. She's a little more excited. She's a little more bouncy, and she's sort of dancing around my legs and running up and down the stairs from the door that we exit and back to us. And, I got this sense about me that she wants to go with me today. She wants to go to work.
And off to work Sophie went, a very rare occasion. Then, a phone call no family ever wants to receive.
A little after 2:30 in the afternoon, I get a call from the alarm company, and I'm told something to the effect that there are houses or dwellings or something on fire in my neighborhood. Now, I may want to check that out.
As Bladen stood before his house engulfed in flames, he came to an indisputable realization.
I'm holding Sophie, and my wife is standing beside me, and everything that matters sort of sums up in that moment, right? There's lots of other things that matter, but you can't replace life. And so all at the same time, I'm saying these silent prayers, thanking God for his provision. I'm trying to figure out how all of this happened and why Sophie's in my arms, because pretty much every other day, she's on the couch in the living room waiting for us to get home.
In closing, Bladen says the one truth that makes this devastation easier to digest is
God with us. That's what it comes down to. And so he's with us in many ways, and I'm a pastor and we can theologize about that all we want for a long time, but to me that's what summarizes my experience. God is with me.
Recapping one of our top news stories, the federal Liberal and Ontario Progressive Conservative governments teamed up to help the 3M Canada factory in Brockville, Ontario expand so it can produce 50 million medical-grade N95 masks annually beginning in 2021. And a look at weekend weather. Yet another beautiful weekend in the Windy City today. Clear skies and a low of 8 degrees for tonight. And for tomorrow, expect more sun with a high of 29. The Alberta government recently brought forth legislation that would protect rural property owners from trespassers. We spoke with Alberta Justice Minister Doug Schweitzer, who says it's important for the province to stick up for farmers and ranchers who are targeted by agenda-driven protesters. That interview is up next.
The Alberta government recently sent its audit of arches and the Lethbridge supervised consumption site to the Lethbridge Police Service to see if criminal charges could potentially be laid. Now, the recent audit revealed that there was $1.6 million worth of government funding that went unaccounted for. To discuss this in a little more detail is our province's Justice Minister, Doug Schweitzer, joining me from Calgary. Thanks a lot for your time, Doug.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me on today.
You bet. Now, what kind of criminal charges are we potentially talking about here in regards to arches and the supervised consumption site?
Well, when you take a look at this, I mean, it's all for now to the police to conduct their investigation, and you don't want to, kind of pre-guess what those charges could be. So it's over to the police now to conduct their investigation to determine whether or not charges would be appropriate in the situation. But it just makes your blood boil, though, when you see, taxpayer dollars go into an organization that is supposed to be used to help, the most vulnerable people in our society, those people that are struggling with addictions, and yet you're seeing trips to Portugal, you're seeing, massive six-figure salaries, and you're seeing money that they can't account for. That's the appropriate step was to send this to the police to see if charges are appropriate in the situation. It's absolutely frustrating, and you know what? And we've also heard the stories of how this has impacted the downtown of Lethbridge and what the consumption site has done to deter small businesses and make people uncomfortable in the downtown. That's why we've done a different approach with our strategy around treatment. And I think we're going to talk a little bit about drug treatment courts and other methods here to get people treatment. It's just not a matter of facilitating drug consumption. It's a matter of giving people treatment and a hope for a future.
Yeah, I know Premier Kenney's also talked about the potential of a mobile SCS being set up here in Lethbridge if potentially that arches and the SCS shuts down as it currently stands now. Let's talk about those drug treatment courts. We're talking about opening up one here in Lethbridge. In your opinion, why are they so important?
Well, they have an amazing track record of actually getting people well. So right now in our justice system, you always hear about people that round through the system. They come in, they come out, come in and out. And what this does, it takes somebody that's truly struggling with an addiction and it puts them through a court supervised process for about 12 to 18 months where they have to come and report to a judge on a weekly basis saying, this is what I've done to get better. This is what I've done to get well.
So accountability, right?
It's a whole accountability. And for many of these people, it's actually far harder than just going and serving a sentence. Because if you go and serve a sentence, you don't have to deal with why you're there in the first place in many instances. So the success rate for those that graduate, 70% of them never come back into the criminal justice system again. So it's really a matter of getting these people well. And when they graduate, many of them reconnect with family, which is so important. They reconnect with family, they get jobs, and they have housing. So they have stability in their lives.
So some of these drug treatment courts, are we actually taking a model from somewhere in the States or Europe?
Well, they originated in the United States for the ones that we based our model on here, but we have a track record of over a decade in Calgary and Edmonton. So we've doubled the capacity in Calgary and Edmonton, and now we're reaching out and we're going to establish one in Lethbridge. We've announced one in Red Deer, and we're going to launch a few more as well in our mid-sized centers.
Now, the UCP recently announced that it has new laws in place to protect rural property owners from crime. Explain how this new law ensures protections for property owners and ensures that trespassers face consequences for their actions.
Well, we heard this loud and clear. Last year, we did a big tour talking about rural crime and hearing from Albertans as to what they were facing. So we've done lots of different pieces to tackle rural crime. We put in place a rapid force, which is going to get 400 new sheriffs on the ground. We have a new rural police funding model as well, which is going to get another 300 police officers into our rural communities. And then when it comes to property rights as well, I mean, I'm not sure if you remember the Eddie Maurice situation where an individual fired a warning shot because he was tired of his property being stolen. And then the person that initially he faced charges himself. Initially, those ultimately were dropped. But then the person came after him with a civil claim and said, you know what, I'm going to sue you now. And so really, when you see this, we said, look, the balance is not working here. The people that are committing these crimes have more rights than the victims. So we've rebalanced it here in Alberta. So if you take reasonable steps now to protect your property, if you take reasonable steps and you're not charged criminally yourself, you then cannot be pursued for a civil claim. We made sure we had the strongest property rights there. We've also enhanced trespassing laws. So if somebody continues to trespass on your property, that individual is going to face serious penalties and fines. So we really want to make sure we have the strongest possible property rights in the province of Alberta.
Now, one of these bills passed. Was this precipitated because of all of the protests taking place at Hutterite turkey farms?
Well, the Jumbo Valley turkey farm was one of those instances we had. But the thing is, though, you go to every community and you hear a story like this, where people, they're being targeted. Our farmers in Alberta are amazing at what they do. They follow the highest of standards. Yet they're being targeted by these small special interest groups that don't like farming. They don't like farmers for some reason. They don't like how animals are treated. You can't keep these people happy. You can't negotiate with them. So yeah, we put in place penalties as well, where if you go and trespass on a farmer's property and you're going in there like this is an occupation of their property and their land. You're really making sure that we can go after those organizations to say, no, not in Alberta, not ever. Our farmers are the foundation of why we are even our province. So let's make sure we give them the protection they deserve.
Now, there are fines and potential jail time as well. Let's talk a bit about those.
Yeah, so we have fines in place. So initially, the fines were just kind of basic, smaller numbers, but now we actually have the ability to find the organizations that are facilitating these things. So really, when you go and look at this, Alberta has the strongest protections now in place in the country. We also, if you remember back to earlier this year when we had all those rail blockades going on, we had people blockading people's ability to get to work, and all these special interest groups, their whole goal was to shut down the economy. So what we did is we brought in place the Critical Infrastructure Defense Act, where if organizations are purposely illegally blockading critical infrastructure, those organizations are going to face thousands of dollars worth of fines every single day that they do that.
Now, many rural Albertans I've spoken with are angry at the Liberal government and their new gun ban, banning over, 1,500 types of guns. These farmers and ranchers say they need the guns to protect themselves, as we talked about earlier, their families and their livestock. Since RCMP may be 30 minutes to an hour away if an intruder shows up in a threatening manner. Now, what are you hearing? Are legal, responsible gun owners still upset?
Oh, when we met earlier this year with Minister Blair, the Minister of Public Safety, and Minister Lametti, the Federal Minister of Justice. So we met with these Liberal justice ministers, and we told them, consult widely in Alberta. Make sure that you go out there and you listen to people and you do this thoughtfully. Instead, what we got was a rushed policy with kind of half-baked, with no clarity as to what the end result is going to be. So all of a sudden you have a bunch of people that are lawful, firearms owners, and now all of a sudden, they don't know up from down. They don't know how they're supposed to hand these firearms back in, or if they should. So really, this just caused chaos in our lawful firearm community. And on top of that, it doesn't get to the root cause of crimes that are being committed with firearms, because 80% of the crimes that are being committed with firearms, those guns are illegally brought in from the United States. So we told our federal counterparts, look, if you're serious about going after gun crime, you have to go after organized crime. On top of that, you have to make sure you crack down the border. That's really the big cause here of firearm use in Canada. And we told them that. They ignored our advice. So that's why we've brought in place a chief firearms officer for the province of Alberta. Initially, this program was run by the federal government, but we're going to take ownership of that here. More Alberta, less Ottawa. We're going to take ownership of this, and we're going to put a chief firearms officer in place from Alberta.
Now, Premier Jason Kenney is looking into a potential provincial police force similar to what Ontario is using right now, what we had many years ago. What would that look like, replacing the RCMP, Doug?
Well, this is one of those things. We had our Fair Deal panel last year and into early this year that went out and talked to Albertans, and they came back recommending that Alberta set up an Alberta Police Service here for the province to replace the RCMP. So right now, my department is looking through what does that mean? What is the cost of that going to be? What's the infrastructure that we have to set up? Training facilities, forensic labs, police stations. So we're looking into doing our homework right now, and by early to mid next year, we'll have that report for cabinet, and we'll be able to make a decision whether or not it makes sense to proceed with an Alberta Police Service.
So just off the top of your head, what are some of the advantages of having a provincial police force over the RCMP?
Well, I think the biggest thing you hear is stability, and it's the continuity where you have somebody from your community that's going to be on your police service. Quite often now, the RCMP, they do good work, but quite often they'll have people that aren't from Alberta, and they won't know where the different towns are. They won't know where, how the community fabric that brings it all together. They won't have that continuity. The other thing too with the Alberta Police Service is that it'll also allow us to keep people here longer. The RCMP, they send people all over Canada. It'll provide that greater continuity as well.
You know, some people I've talked to, some of the critics are saying that the advantage of the RCMP, you've got this national database, so it's easy to reach out to different jurisdictions. If somebody's wanted, let's say in Swift Current, Saskatchewan, Halifax, Nova Scotia, we've got this national database, but that's not going to be the case with the provincial police force. It'll be harder because you have to deal with different, police services across the country.
Well, and you know what? This is one of those things that we have technology now that allows databases to talk to each other. It's something that we could very easily figure out. I mean, even in Alberta, we have, you got the Tabor police, you've got Lethbridge, you got Medicine Hat, you have all these different municipal ones, and we find a way to communicate with each other when particularly when you have an individual that is definitely needed to be brought in. So we have a way to communicate with each other. I'm not concerned about our ability to have databases talk to each other.
So Doug, what steps is the province taking to eliminate the shortage of prosecutors?
So we campaigned on bringing in 50 new prosecutors in the province of Alberta. So we're actually actively hiring right now to bring in these additional prosecutors. But it's similar to if you wanted to grow your police service, you have to recruit as well. So we've actually doubled the number of students that we have coming in, so young lawyers that graduated law school, and we're having them go to different communities across Alberta. So we've doubled the capacity, and next year we're actually going to have the largest articling student class in the entire province, larger than any of the private law firms as well, to make sure that every year we bring in more talent to be able to fill our ranks of prosecutors. For too long, we just weren't recruiting enough. And as a result, we kind of had this slow depletion in our ranks of prosecutors where we couldn't keep up with the caseload. So we're changing that strategy. We're also out there hiring more prosecutors as well so we can deal with cases, because the former government under the NDP brought in what they called a triage, where they would just simply drop the non-priority cases. And we've heard loud and clear from Albertans that if the police go through the time to find someone, to charge them, that they want to make sure that the full extent of the law is pursued by our prosecutors. And a lot of that is making sure they have the capacity themselves to handle the caseload.
The COVID-19 pandemic has been a big challenge for many Albertans, many Canadians, and all around the world. But there's still also a big drug crisis in many towns and cities across our province, including here in Lethbridge. Now, our Mayor, Chris Spearman, was saying how much of a need there is for a full-time scan unit in our city to help permanently shut down the drug houses. Because right now, they shut down one and another one opens up three doors down the block, and it's just a vicious cycle. Is one forthcoming?
So on that front there, I mean, we have Scan that provides services. We did shut down a house in Lethbridge earlier this year. We are actually investing though in the Alberta Law Enforcement Response Team. This is a coordinated effort between different policing agencies. It's very technical, specific, and they go after organized crime. They've had an immense amount of success as well. So when you see the big busts that get the drugs and the guns off the street, quite often the Alberta Law Enforcement Response Team is behind it. And we actually just made a real strategic investment in the Lethbridge area to provide further officers for this team to go after organized crime.
Now, some jurisdictions in the United States have brought forth body cams that local law enforcement have to wear. Any chance we can maybe see mandatory body cams being worn by police throughout the province?
Well, you know what? This is a really interesting technology, and we're doing a consultation right now on the future of the Police Act, as well as the future of police policy in the province of Alberta. And our plan is to have some answers on this later this year and into the fall of next year regarding the future of those areas. But I've seen some of these technologies. I'm not sure if you remember the show Cops back in the day in the 90s, where you'd have them going with the police service, and they'd actually kind of narrate their life. Oh, we're pulling up here. We got a situation. I've seen some of these body camera technologies where the police will actually narrate their life as to what they're doing in the situation to provide better evidence for court. So like, I got this call, I come in, and it has the ability potentially to create a better accountability for the police, but also better evidence for the courts as well. So we're giving it a serious look right now in the province of Alberta.
Doug, oftentimes when there is a divorce, dads struggle to see their kids. Is it possible to reform family court without the Family Lawyers Association lobbying against it? I mean, apparently it's a billion-dollar business that hurts families and fathers and only benefits lawyers financially.
Well, it's one of those things where we have to make sure that the justice system works for Albertans. And I get letters every single day from parents that are going through a family system right now that is just not working for them. And they feel as though it's actually made their relationship with their children, it's damaged their family unit, even when they're trying to get along with their former spouse and trying to find some way to work together. So we're listening to that. And some of the things too is that some of these issues shouldn't be in the court system at all. Like there's ways that you could actually deal with family issues outside of a court process that would probably be far smoother from a process standpoint. It would probably cause less acrimony between the parents as they kind of try and find their new normal. And really, we're looking for some solutions there to help save people money too. Because in many of these instances, the person that profits is the lawyer. And it really should be about what's in the best interest of the family and the kids.
Legal Aid Alberta introduced a new initiative called Advance Appearance Duty Council, which allows people to prepare for court by phone or email instead of making a trip to the courthouse in person. Now, it's temporary until August 28th. Doug, Legal Aid says this was important to have during the pandemic since the Alberta courts reopened. Your thoughts?
You know what? During this pandemic, we've actually had an amazing amount of advancement in technology use, video conferences, different ways that we can get our court system continuing to function in a pandemic. And a lot of these things are actually really useful tools that we should look at keeping for the long term. And I think it also helps level the playing field because quite often legal services get concentrated in Calgary and Edmonton, and the bigger, the Court of Appeal matters, things like that. But by using video technology, there's no reason why a lawyer in Lethbridge or Tabor or Medicine Hat couldn't be able to provide those same services that are provided in the bigger cities. And it helps level that playing field. So we're looking at lots of different ways to keep technology use kind of at a premium in our court system.
Alberta Justice Minister Doug Schweitzer, thanks for joining me today from Calgary.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me on.
It's a case that's been making headlines for over 8 months. A Lethbridge man who had been living in Calgary went missing last November. The last place 26-year-old Marshall Iwasa was known to be was here in Lethbridge in the early morning hours of Monday, November the 18th. A week later, his truck was found torched in the backcountry near Pemberton, British Columbia, but Marshall has never been found. Marshall's case has been classified simply as a missing persons case, but his family feels that this could be something else. With me now is Marshall's sister, Paige Fogan. Thank you so much, Paige, for being here today. We really appreciate it. I know it's a difficult case to talk about. So, police say that an examination of Marshall's truck in the area at the time offered no evidence that there was any criminal activity or that Marshall had ever been there. But you think maybe something different is going on there, right?
Yeah, that's something that we've been kind of pushing for since the beginning, is that, we've never really seen any concrete proof that Marshall was up there, drove his truck up there, or went there on his own choice. Since the investigations continued and since we've went to the truck site, it kind of fueled our fire of pushing and saying, no, we really don't believe he went up there. The location was so difficult to get to and was so challenging even for our vehicles to get up there, that we really don't believe that he drove his own truck there on his own choice.
Right. Okay, so let's back up for a minute. You and your family recently had the opportunity for the very first time, all of you together, to travel to BC, to travel to the area where the truck is and see the truck for the first time. Describe that for me. Describe the area.
First, the drive there was so challenging. We had GPSed it, and even just to get to Pemberton was supposed to be about 13 hours. But we ran into some problems with the weather and the roads, and we ended up taking about 30 hours for us to drive there. So it was a lot longer than we had even originally anticipated. And that was we were the shortest ones. A couple of my other cousins, they took about 40 hours to get there just due to road delays, traffic backlogs. Yeah, so it was
and
really...
this is summertime weather, right?
Yeah, and this is in good weather.
Yeah.
So that was challenging. And then once we got there to Pemberton, a group had reached out to us for Low BC to offer to take our family actually up to the truck site because from our knowledge of it, you'd need 4x4s or ATVs to actually get up there to where the truck was found. Okay. So they came and they took us up there, and even for them, they had to stop at a certain place, let the air out of their tires to help their vehicles be able to crawl over the rocks better.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and this is a skilled 4x4 group that offered their services to us. So, we were able to go up in their vehicles to get to the truck site. It was, for me, going and actually driving through there was quite an experience, and I think my family, a lot of them feel the same. There are spots where we were going over quite deep holes and rocks and rivers at one point.
Crossing through water and all kinds of rough terrain, right?
Very, very challenging, and that made it solidified it for me essentially that I don't believe Marshall would have taken his truck up there, not on his own choice, if he ever was even up there.
Okay. Now, police were saying in their initial investigation that they think no one was there except for Marshall. So, I mean, at what point do they classify it as criminal?
That's a good question and something that we've been trying to figure out since the beginning. There are items up there that I've identified that are not Marshall's. And so that's frustrating, you know, for us to hear that they don't believe anyone else was up there, because there are items that are definitely not Marshall's that were at the scene. And so that's something that we've been pushing for, of like, we don't think he was ever up there by himself, or maybe even not ever up there. They were able to get into his financial records and found that, you know, nothing significant was found. That includes no gas stops to get his vehicle there, because his truck would have taken a lot of fuel to get there. Yeah. I know for us, we stopped at least 3 times just to get gas. Yeah. And so like for that, you know, I don't believe that he was ever up there, either by his choice or on his own.
Okay. Now, Marshall was an avid outdoorsman, right? And he did enjoy hiking. How do you know for sure that he wasn't familiar with the area?
That's just through knowing him and talking to his friends and knowing like them and their experiences with him. For me, all of our hikes have been either in Hawaii or in Alberta, and a little bit in Montana, where we always have gone camping in the summer as children growing up. Right. So for us, those are our main areas that we go hiking. And then even talking with his friends, all of their hikes were in Alberta, never really in BC. He's not familiar with there. And all of the hikes that he's done, he usually goes with friends and family. Right. Like, he's never really done these hikes on his own. So he's not like a solo hiker. So that's, all of those are indicators for us that like he didn't go there. He didn't know that place.
Right. Now, you were saying there were items found near the truck that you didn't identify as Marshall's. Were they fresh items? Like how, like, do you think they were there the whole time, or did they possibly somebody dumped them? Because it's the bottom of a trailhead, right? Do I have that correct? There's the hiking trail.
Yeah, and then you would hike up to the hut. So the way that I know those items aren't his is I identified them from the first set of photos from the hikers that found the truck. And then since then, every time I do get the opportunities to see some photos or see some items that were found at the site, either by the hikers or by police, I've still identified items that I don't believe are his each time. And so the difficult part is that I've never actually been able to go through all of the items that were found at the truck site. So we've never fully been able to see everything that was there and go through them.
Initially, the ones that RCMP found. Yeah.
Everything, yeah. We've never been able to go through those.
Right, because they took them in as evidence, right? Okay, well, I guess that makes sense. Now, there were some items that have not been found that are pretty important personal items, right? You were mentioning.
Yeah, we've still never been able to find his wallet, his license, his backpack, his most recent cell phone, his most recent laptop that he was using from SAIT. So all of those items have never been accounted for. Things that he needed, like contact solution, the cases, those have never been found either.
Right, real personal items. Now, last time I had Cassie in here, this was a few months back, we talked about how at the time police still weren't able to access, I think because of the Missing Persons Act, right? There's a privacy issue with accessing bank records and phone records, but I think since then, it's changed a little bit. They've been able to get in.
Yeah, so what we've been told by the investigator is that they were able to access a little bit of his bank records and look a little bit further back, not just the last transaction. But from there was nothing significant found, including no gas stops along the way from Calgary to Lethbridge or from Lethbridge to Pemberton.
Right, which seems impossible, right?
Which is impossible on his truck.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the other thing that's just so puzzling is how could there not be any surveillance anywhere between here and there?
Yep, that's been something that's been really frustrating from the get-go, is not having any footage or any concrete evidence that he was ever there or on the way there or anything like that. So we've never got any footage. And I think, you know, for us, that's been one thing that we've been trying to push for, is for this to be investigated as a criminal case so that we can get access to more information. Because like you mentioned, when Cassie was here, there was a lot of barriers with the Missing Persons Act in trying to get historical data of Marshall's movements prior to his disappearance. And I think that's something that we're still continuing to push for, is to get those answers and get that information. You know, and for me, one of the biggest things would be this fire investigation that, you know, just happened.
Yeah. No results yet, right?
Yeah, from what I've been told, they're still waiting on the fire investigator report, which is a month now, just over a month from when they were up there, and a full almost 9 months since Marshall went missing. So, you know, I've wanted a fire investigator up there since day one.
Yes.
And for them to just have one, I mean, I'm happy that one went up there when they did the final search that they just completed. But, you know, it's a little bit late, and we're still waiting for that report because, you know, if it's considered arson, you know, that's criminal.
Right.
And so that I'm hoping that we could then get it pushed into a criminal case, a criminal investigation.
Yeah, absolutely. It seems really strange that they would wait that long. Is there any idea why? I mean, to me, it seems like anybody could go up there and tamper with evidence, right?
And that was our concern from the beginning of having the trucks still being out there, is that it wasn't a controlled site, right? And that was hard having that. But yeah, we definitely would have, you know, wanted something as soon as possible. And I really don't have an answer as to exactly why this report wasn't done in the beginning.
Right. Yes. It must be very frustrating. Now, you up until recently were living in Hawaii, so you were trying to do all this from overseas, essentially. You've made a few trips back to Lethbridge. On one of those, I believe you went through the storage room, which is essentially the last place that we know Marshall to have been, right, on that morning of November 18th. So he left your mom's house on November 17th, late in the evening, right? Yeah. Went to the storage room, and no idea what he was needing or looking for?
No, I think that's something that has kind of puzzled us too,
Yeah.
even as his family. We went through the unit. First, while I was in Hawaii, the police went through the unit. And then when I came back, I went through the unit again with police. We didn't find anything significant or missing. Interesting though, we did find all of our camping gear.
Right.
So, you know, if Marshall had been wanting to go camping or do some hiking or backpacking on his own, all of our gear was in our unit together. Yeah, and the other important fact is that the gear that you need to go backpacking overnight, if you're carrying all your stuff in, is very different than the gear that you take when you just drive up to a campsite and pull it out of your car.
Right.
It's different weights, it's different, packed differently, different sizes. And so we don't own any of that gear. Marshall's never owned day or overnight backpacking
Right, like the
trip gear.
backcountry
Yeah,
gear,
that
yeah.
you carry your stuff in.
Yeah.
He's never owned that. But all of our car camping gear is in our storage unit. So either way, if you look at it, if he was going to go hiking there overnight by himself, which is kind of what you would need to go up to the hut, he doesn't own that material. And if it was like that he was just going to camp with his regular things, all of those are in our storage unit.
Right. Interesting. Another thing that's been a big mystery sort of shrouding this is finding out that he wasn't enrolled in school like you guys originally thought. Cassie and I talked about this a few months back as well, that, you know, it was kind of a surprise, but it wasn't like a big shock. Nobody thought anything really of it. But I guess my question was, have you ever found out what Marshall was doing in September, October, and November if he wasn't in school? Nobody's ever come forward and said, hey, he was working for us, or no T4s were ever sent?
No, we've never received any information of Marshall working somewhere else or doing something different. One of the things that we did know, though, is in the summertime, he had been volunteering. He kind of described it as like volunteering for experience. So he was getting experience in the field he wanted to go into. I didn't know the name of the company that he was doing that for, though, but it was all remote. And so he had described for me some of the kind of like help desk activities he had been doing or learning from this company. So we've never heard from them, and that's something that he definitely could have continued doing in September, October. We also know that he had been working on a game online, and he had been working on that. He had put about 800 hours into it. Yes, and he had been working on it the morning that he went down to Lethbridge as well. So on the 17th.
Yeah, and when you went through the apartment, nothing jumped out at you. It didn't look like somebody that wasn't planning on ever coming back, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
His stuff was all there. It was all left in, you know, normal condition.
What do you think happened to Marshall in your heart of hearts?
You know, that's something I ask myself every day. Like, there is not a time that goes by where I don't kind of think about it and flip-flop on what I think happened. You know, whether something happened unintentionally or he was in the wrong place at the wrong time. You know, I really don't know. I've thought about every single scenario and, you know, thought about them all the time. But I think for me, one of the things that we're trying to do is kind of stick with what we know and what we've been crossing off the list. So at this point, I can confidently say, like, I don't believe that he went up there on his own choice or maybe was never even up there. And so that's why I feel strongly that we should start looking into different locations and different things that might have happened to him and primarily push this into a criminal case.
Right. Yeah, I wonder what it would take to do that.
Yeah, that's something that we're still trying to explore and figure out, because I think this realm of missing persons is so new to us, and you know, every case is so unique. So we're still trying to figure it out of, you know, what will it take? Because at this point, he's been missing for so long. There's been no activity. His vehicle's been found in a remote area that he's not familiar with. It's been completely burnt out. You know, and maybe if they get the fire investigation report and it's arson, then we can get that push into criminal.
How did it feel going back to that spot and seeing his truck? Was it like closure for you, or did it open up more questions than answers?
It really opened up a lot of questions with the items that were found there, and just getting up to the truck site really made us be like, our family question more what could have happened to Marshall.
Right. Okay. Well, I know there's still missing posters out there and whatnot. What would you like to say to anybody who might have any information?
I think that's the biggest thing is, you know, now that we're moving into summer and people are going to be out and about, just asking if you need any posters or if you're heading out anywhere, if you can put up posters, that would be awesome. Sharing our information online, all of that's so helpful in spreading awareness and keeping some focus on Marshall and that he's still missing and we're still looking for answers. And, you know, we really won't stop until we have answers to what happened. And so, you know, any way that people can help, sharing online is always helpful. Joining our Find Marshall Iwasa Facebook group. That's where we share all of our information and our updates. And it's actually our family that's running it. So, you know, if people are asking questions, it's usually myself or one of my family members that's actually replying to them. So it's a good platform for us to communicate with the public, and it's been so helpful to have because we've been able to get really great ideas from the public that are throwing their ideas, their thoughts out to us. You know, people that are familiar with Pemberton and the Brian Waddington hut reached out to us and said, hey, you know, it must have been someone that knew this area that got up there because it's really difficult. And all of that has been so helpful to us. Yeah. So, you know, anything people can do to help would be really appreciated.
Definitely. And it's in the hands of the Lethbridge Police Service now. So definitely call Crime Stoppers, call LPS.
If you have any tips, definitely reach 100%. Out to police.
Paige, thank you so much for being here with us today. I know this is such a difficult time for you and your family, but we really appreciate it.
Thank you for having us, and helping us keep the awareness of Marshall out there. It's so critical. Thank you.
As the COVID-19 pandemic continues to wreak havoc around the world, many are grappling with loneliness, anxiety, and depression. It seems like we've lost control and perhaps we've lost a little hope. Today's guest has some timely advice and encouragement. Dr. Greg Jantz is a psychologist and author and founder of the Center, A Place of Hope, one of the top facilities for treatment of depression in the U.S. His latest book is 5 Keys to Health and Healing. Dr. Greg Jantz, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, such an important topic and good to be with you today.
Awesome. So your book starts out by saying everyone struggles with challenges in life, but we all need hope. Why is hope so vital to our health?
Well, you take this panic pandemic we've been in. I'm calling it a panic pandemic, but now we've got to shift and look at this pandemic with a purpose. And the purpose has got to be we've got to reset some things in our life. And so what I talk about, and you know, we work with folks who come in from all over to work on anxiety and depression. And the reason being is we've reached an emotional saturation point. People have reached their limit. They're on this edge of despair. And so today our topic of hope, and hope comes when you have a plan. Today we want to help begin to create a plan for hope.
Yeah, exactly. Now, why is it that we tend to worry so much? And how can we learn to control our thought life?
Yeah, how about that? We have a lot to worry about right now, too. It's where we put our point of focus. Some of us learn to be really good worriers. And so you have a pandemic, you have a lot to worry about. And we can keep layering our life with worry, which will take us to anxiety. By the way, you know if you have anxiety if you have physical symptoms. So I got sweaty palms, my heart rate's up, shortness of breath, digestive, aches and pains. You've got anxiety. So I can take worry and turn it into anxiety, but I need to stop and hit that pause button today and go, okay, what do I really need to change? Well, one of the things we've got to change is how we think. And we need to learn, what's it mean to renew our thinking? What's it mean to begin to put the truth in? Because worry and anxiety, it distorts reality.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are going through that right now too, especially with everything that's going on. Yeah. Now, you suggest in your book that gratitude or a thankful heart is actually an antidote for toxic thinking. How so?
Yes, gratitude. What an interesting word at this time. You go, I don't have much to be thankful for. And we get into that thinking mode. What if, just what if the next 30 days you decided, I'm going to live a little differently. I'm going to start my day with 3 gratitudes. 3 gratitudes. I'm going to write down, I'm going to create a gratitude journal. Here you go. I'm going to start today. I'm going to write down my 3 gratitudes every day. And just maybe it's something really simple, which is usually the best gratitudes, but notice over time that gratitude begins to change our perspective. Gratitude moves us from being self-absorbed to we begin to see, well, maybe there's others I can be of help. Gratitude begins to create something called optimism. Optimism means I have hope. I'm looking towards the future. So let's create more optimism right now.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, it's so easy to allow those negative emotions to take control. So, I mean, like anger and fear, right? You refer in your book to anger, fear, and guilt as an emotionally toxic trinity. Can you explain?
Oh, yes. Anger, I call them the 3 deadly emotions: anger, fear, and guilt. Anger, another word for anger could be hurt. Another word for anger could be frustration. Hey, by the way, we have a lot to possibly be angry and frustrated with right now. But as we start looking and going, okay, am I going to be ruled by anger and hurt? Maybe I need to figure out some forgiveness here. So there's anger. If I'm going to be healthy, I've got to learn how to deal with anger and frustration. The next one's fear, worry, anxiety. Fear is the great paralyzer. Fear keeps us in a place of paralyzation. We don't take much action. We're afraid. We hold inward. That's fear. And then there's guilt. Guilt can be usually shame. I feel like I'm defective. I'm not good enough. Something's wrong with me. So we've got to figure out to be emotionally healthy, anger, fear, and guilt.
Wow. Now, during this COVID-19 pandemic, so many have had to live in isolation, unfortunately. Now, how does this impact our health and wellness?
Yeah. So we take quarantine, and I'm doing this because quarantine holds you in, confinement, and we mix this with it's too long. Quarantine that lasts too long ends up creating more and more anxiety and depression. So really, what we're preparing for is we have a mental health pandemic. We're going to have more mental health issues emerging as they are already than ever before. And so we want to be prepared to deal with this. We want to be prepared to really deal with the anxiety and depression. It's going to be, I think we could say right now, anxiety is epidemic. Who don't you know who's struggling with some anxiety and everything that's going on? So that's why, my mission is, and our mission here at the Center, A Place of Hope, is to change lives for good, to equip you with God's help. We don't know exact outcomes, but we know that we can change our perspective. We're going to use this as a time to reset. Reset means, okay, I don't like what I'm in, but I'm going to grow. It's going to be a pandemic with a purpose for me. I'm not going to be defeated by this.
Wow. This isolation reduces the opportunity to maintain our relationships too. Now, in your book, you talk about the importance and the qualities of good relationships.
Yes. So relationships. So if we're isolated, maybe many of our relationships have been digital. Oh boy. And we've been over digitalized. Yeah, our relationships. And here's the issue. It's okay as an emergency provision to be able to have all the ways we can communicate digitally. But you know what? We need one another. And we're designed for touch. We're designed for hugs. We're designed for in-person interactions. And so let's remember the importance of that. It really is important. So as we emerge, reintegrate from all this, we need to remember real life relationships are important.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, of course, speaking of relationships, you believe that it's important to have an accountability partner. So what exactly does this mean?
Well, if we're going to keep growing, and we've come through a mode where we've been shocked and traumatized by everything, and things felt like out of our control, and now we're moving into this growth mode. It's a mode that says, well, in order to keep growing, I need accountability. I just can't say, hey, I'm going to go out and do my 20-minute walk a couple times a day. Well, who are you holding that standard with? So we all need one another.
Yeah, it helps us to stay on track, doesn't it, right? Yeah, 100%. Now, you mentioned a daily walk. So you're a psychologist, not a fitness trainer, obviously, but you say that physical fitness is very important to maintain emotional health. Makes sense.
Oh, we've got to keep the movement up. Movement is so important. Movement and water. Have your water, okay? And one of the things, when we get full of anxiety, we tend not to drink our water. We tend to drink other things. So keep water up, keep movement up. The difference over time, it's just not one time. The difference over time will make a big difference.
I'm so glad now they have those flavored waters too, because water's not my favorite. It definitely helps me get the water
Come on,
in.
let's have your water today.
Good advice. Now, I wonder how many people will continue to isolate even after the restrictions are lifted, simply out of fear. What's your advice on this?
Don't let fear keep you paralyzed. Fear distorts reality. And maybe you need to test the waters. But we have been conditioned during this period to feel fear. There's the fear of the what ifs. Well, what if? What if this virus comes back? What if? And so we have all these potential what ifs that can create fear. So just as fear is kind of contagious. If we're afraid, we all kind of run together. Remember, courageousness is contagious. So let's be courageous. Let's create a positive direction. Now, I don't mean that's super easy to do, but we can do this together. Let's be courageous.
Yeah, sounds great. It's just hard to practice sometimes, isn't it?
Oh, sure.
Now, in your book, you talked about the fact that God is in control, even while so much of our lives are out of control these days, especially. So how can we learn to actually embrace this and be at peace with that?
Yeah. Here's what we need to know. It's a real test of faith. I'm going to decide fear or faith. And I got to keep deciding on this faith side. But one of the things is we're going to see, and I've seen it personally, we're going to see, wow, through all this, through this sheltering, God has been my shelter. God has been my shelter. And I'm growing through this. And every time in biblical history that God has sheltered someone and people have been sheltered, there's been a victory. So let's be on the victory outlook, shall we?
Yeah, good idea. Now, is it possible that God sometimes allows us to face uncertainty so that we learn to build our faith and trust in Him?
Yeah, that's why I say, well, how about this? Pandemic with a purpose. The purpose is I'm walking through some things that may be extremely stressful, may be really rough. I'm walking through those. Let's keep it up.
Good advice, absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Jans. It was such a pleasure to have you on our show.
Nice to be with you today, and let's just say it, there is hope.
Exactly. That is Dr. Greg Jans. He is the author of 5 Keys to Health and Healing, available at aplaceofhope.com. On behalf of all of us here at VCN, thanks for watching.